You're listening to the Java Easily podcast, episode number 8.
Java Easy. News, tutorials, tips. Everything you need to know as a beginner Java developer.
So before we kick off into this episode, if you're completely new to Java, you might want to check out our Java Jumpstart guide. It's completely free. It's available at javaeasily.com, so you can sign up there. And it gives you a nice starter guide in getting started with Java technology and getting started as a Java coder. If you're not a complete beginner and you have experience already, then maybe check out the courses we have to offer at courses.javaeasily.com. Anyway, let's jump into the episode now. In this episode, we're going to talk about how to get unstuck as a Java developer. Now, I guess it's useful to clarify what we mean by unstuck. So when I say feeling stuck, what I really mean is that you don't feel that you can find a way forwards in whatever you're doing right now. And that might seem very deep and expansive, and sure, the reasons why you might be stuck can uncover stuff which, really causes you to reflect internally on what's going on around you, to look a bit inwardly into what's happening inside yourself and how you feel about what's going on. So certainly, in trying to find an answer to this big question of why am I stuck at the minute, that can for sure lead you down some paths of introspection. But it's important to keep things light, don't get too wrapped up in the whole process, and just try and think objectively about why you might be stuck. So yeah, this is not turning into some kind of wishy-washy, new age self-help podcast. It's still very much focused on technology and getting started with Java and being able to be effective in using Java. But along the way, as Java developers, we're going to encounter some roadblocks. And I find that more often than not, the roadblocks you encounter typically can be ones inside your head. So, with that said, let's jump in then. So, what are some reasons why you can just feel stuck in what you're doing? First of all, let's look at different types of being stuck. One type of being stuck is not knowing how to approach a problem. In other words, you're not sure what kind of solution you might want to put together to implement the specific coding task you've been given. This might be you're not sure what framework to use, you're not sure what architectural style you should employ, or maybe what design patterns might be useful to use, those kinds of things. So for example, if you're writing a full stack application and you had to come up with a front end, again, that choice of frameworks comes at you. Should it be React? Or should it be Angular? If you're looking at a single page application, do you even need a single page application? Do you need that kind of responsiveness? And with all the technical overhead that comes with that in terms of understanding how React and Angular work? Or can you just do some simple server-side based pages, old school JSPs, that kind of thing, and that's good enough for now? So that might be something that you feel stuck with in choosing which technical direction a solution should go in. Another blocker could be, as we've said, architectural styles. For example, should you use a request-response style of doing things? Or could you employ messaging, for example? Thinking about producers and consumers. If you went down the messaging route, is it better to do peer-to-peer messaging using queues? Or PubSub, publish subscribe, using topics? If you went down that route as well, do you care to have durable subscriptions? That kind of thing. On a less enterprise type scale, how do you want to handle the threading in an application? Do you want to use old school synchronization with synchronized methods and the like, or use some of the Java util concurrency classes instead? Do you want to get fancier with executors, employing techniques like completable futures, things like that? And sometimes these mental roadblocks might even cross a couple of these areas. For example, deciding whether to go down a reactive programming route. And the third point we had was design patterns. You might have a bit of a blocker thinking, I know about these design patterns, and I know theoretically what they do, and I can see in my mind how the different components of the design pattern are coded up and roughly what each design pattern is designed to do, but yet when it comes to applying that in a practical context to a real system, you're at a bit of a loss, not knowing exactly how to bridge that gap. So that's another roadblock we might have too. So I'd kind of categorize all those kind of mental blocks as being purely technical. In other words, there's nothing there relating to, for example, the context of the project you're working in, that is to say the people you're working with, the management styles you're working with, the release schedules you're up against, all that kind of stuff. Very much technical in nature, those kind of roadblocks. Another time you might feel stuck might be related to people. You might get to a stage where you just feel kind of despondent in a team. That's certainly happened to me before. I've worked in various different teams, and even if you're a very happy and positive person in general, which I am typically, and I'm not the kind of person who lets things get me down easily, I always try to find the positive in things. Sometimes you just work with team members who, how can I put it, just have a negative energy. And this can be for various reasons, not necessarily to go into what those might be right now. We can maybe cover those in a different episode. But yeah, when you're faced with a particular character who can be very negative, or make negative comments, or look at things in a negative way, or have little digs, when you're trying to get a point across in design meetings or planning sessions or whatever it might be, that can leave you feeling kind of, for want of a better phrase, shut down, as if you feel like shut down or stifled by that particular person. We have this concept of, I think it's called social safety or something like that, which is a term for being able to feel when you're in a meeting with other people, with your peers and with a manager, co-workers or whatever, that you have the freedom to be able to express your ideas then and there in front of other people without a fear of being shot down, because nobody likes that, do they? It just doesn't make it fun for anybody. So sometimes it can be a people problem. Code reviews, that's another thing as well. I've worked with people in the past where it would take like almost seemingly endless iterations of having to redo a pull request. That's when you're submitting your chunk of work to the code base to the team to say, please accept this for merging. You finished a piece of work, you're happy with where it is, you're happy with what it does, and you're handing it over to the team to say, yeah, have a look at this, and if it's all good, if you're happy with it, let's merge it because it implements this specific feature. But yeah, I've had issues where, I had one issue in fact, one time, where I coded something in the way that I thought it should be done, and then this other teammate looked at it, rejected the PR, and said, no, you should do it this other way. Okay, I then did it the other way. And then this other teammate, during a stand-up meeting, I think it was, said, oh yeah, can we have a conversation about this piece of work? I just want to try and understand it. Yeah, sure, no problem. So we have a conversation afterwards. And then he says, well, why are you doing it this way? Why on earth would you do it using this particular thing? I said, oh, because this other person had said I should do it that way. I said, no, that's not right. You should do it this way. So anyway, so then I change it to bring it in line with this other developer. And then once again, you submit the PR. And again, it was kind of rejected with like multiple comments from the original person who rejected it. And it's extremely tedious. As a professional Java developer with well over 20 years experience, I think probably 25 years experience or whatever, to have to do multiple implementations of the same thing just to pacify different developers' styles and esoteric desires of how they believe fundamentally inside themselves the code should look, when functionally the piece of work doesn't change at all, yeah, it becomes very demotivating. So even though I'm a professional Java developer, I'm a contractor, do freelance development work with all this experience, it still happens to me as well, where you get to points where you not reflect on the futility of it all. That sounds a bit too negative, but you just kind of feel blocked by it, so to speak. So yeah, so people can be another thing as well. So we've covered two areas so far, which might leave us feeling blocked. That's the technical side and the people side. And the last thing I suggest can get you feeling stuck is more for beginners, but it's about not knowing what to learn, not knowing in which direction to take your technical learning. You know, with all this sea of frameworks, different types of technology, different languages, different programming styles, different forums, different books, different courses, different and conflicting opinions on the web, you can feel very stuck very quickly in not knowing which way to proceed. And with a language as large as Java, with an ecosystem as large as it has, that can lead you to feeling stuck too. So, three areas then: technical, people, and educational. So, the big question is, how do we move forward then? How do we move past these things and just get moving again? And that's all we're really looking at here. We're not looking at making huge strides and permanently solving any issues we might have. Like, for example, if you've got a toxic coworker, how you can completely solve that situation. Or if you don't know how to move forward with what to learn next, how you can completely have a step-by-step path of everything you need to learn from now until the end of your career. Or how you can completely know everything about all technologies and all frameworks such that you never have this feeling of which one should I use. We're not looking to do that because that's impossible. All we're looking to do is to be able to just feel that we can start moving forwards again. So we're stuck at one moment in time through whatever reason, technical, people, educational, whatever it might be. How do we get that feeling of becoming unstuck, out of the quicksand if you like, or out of the mud? Imagine you're a car, you're trying to get out of the mud. You've got to have a strategy for being able to do that. With cars, you can put it in a low gear, just apply a little bit of gas. With a bit of patience and everything, you'll soon get out of the hole. But how do we do that, given these three areas we've just spoken about now? I guess the answer, thinking about this now, comes to me in three different areas: constant self-improvement, freedom of experimentation, and knowledge as power. Now these might seem like big concepts. I'll explain what I mean by each of them. Okay, so constant self-improvement. So the first area, not knowing which framework to use or which architectural style to employ or design patterns to use, that kind of thing. The only way you can address that area is through, first and foremost, knowing about the different frameworks and styles and that kind of stuff. So that can be, for example, taking courses on that, reading books on that. By whatever means you instill that education inside yourself, you need to be doing that. But there's this idea of constancy too. So it shouldn't be kind of like a one-off thing where at the start of your career, you want to learn all the technologies and then not learn anything else for the rest of the 20-25 years you're working. Don't do it like that. You've got to look at things really. It's really about mindset. You've got to look at things in terms of you always need to improve yourself. You always need to learn the next new thing. You always need to level up your knowledge, particularly in IT and software engineering, because things are moving so quickly now. It's not like the old days, for example, when we had, you may have heard of the language COBOL. COBOL was a very simple language, and back in those days, in like the 60s and the 70s, you weren't really paid for your knowledge of the language itself, which was very simple. Instead, you were paid for the knowledge of the system that you were working on. And typically these systems would have millions of lines worth of code, and your value as a programmer to the, not usually the single organization that you worked with for your entire career. Once you found a job as a developer, you'd pretty much stay with that company to retirement age. But yeah, your value to that company wasn't in your understanding of the different technologies and how they related to each other, like it is today, for example, in 2023. Instead, it was about your knowledge of the actual system. In other words, being able to make your way through these millions of lines worth of code, through this massive sea of code, ocean of code, if you like, to be able to add new features and functionality. But it's moved now from those times with a very simple language like COBOL, where that's all you needed to know back then, to now you need to know about 20, 30, maybe even 40 different technologies to be able to produce a full system. So now, jumping forwards 40, 50 years or whatever, it's really about knowing how these different frameworks fit together, being able to see the commonality between the different frameworks, and being able to get to grips with one very quickly and be productive with it very quickly to start delivering on the features that are being promised to the business. So yeah, you definitely need to have this constant self-improvement where you're learning about all these technologies and frameworks. Now, how do you get this constancy? You could set aside a specific amount of time per week, so like 30 minutes per week, to read up on something, on different areas that you've discovered along the way during the week. Maybe you have a notebook where you write down different things you want to look at during the allocated time period. And you can set yourself like a recurrent appointment in your diary. So you say, okay, now it's, I don't know, say Saturday morning, I'm going to do an hour or half an hour or whatever it is on technology. And you might allocate more or less time with that, depending upon whether you have other commitments like a family or not, and you've got your complete freedom of your own free time and that kind of stuff. That's one way of doing it, with a recurrent scheduled appointment with yourself, so you always remember to have that kind of upskilling time built into your schedule. Or another way, and a way that I prefer to be honest, is to do things in kind of a just-in-time type way, where as you encounter something that you're not familiar with, that's when you take a step back, hit the pause button, and then read up on how that works then and there. And doing it this style means that you're always self-improving in pace with when you actually need to have that knowledge. And this brings us on to the next item, which is freedom of experimentation. So I'm calling it that, freedom of experimentation. It seems like a nice term for it. What I mean by freedom of experimentation is the fact that as a developer, you need to have built into your schedule, or built into your routine if you like, the ability to experiment with a specific technology. In other words, to just play with that technology, that might be a framework, a new language, a command line tool, whatever it might be, you need to have time to be able to play with that technology in isolation. So completely isolated from the actual project that you're working on. Don't try to plug it into an existing code base of hundreds of thousands of lines or whatever of code. Don't do that. What I typically do is I'll create like a very small project, completely self-contained, standalone, and I'll try and get the smallest possible unit of code working within that project. If it's a new framework I'm trying to get to grips with, maybe I'll step through the code in some sample projects as well and have a look at that. But usually I'll try and do things myself completely from scratch, reading the documentation. And then I'll take this small project and I'll build on it bit by bit, usually copying and pasting the directory. So I'm not even thinking about version control at this point. I'm happy to just copy and paste the directory instead. And I'll gradually make it progressively more sophisticated and use other features of the framework and everything just to exercise them so that I can understand how that framework works. And then I'll start to step through the code of these small projects, these small self-contained projects that I've done, and step through the framework code as well, so I can understand and see how it works behind the scenes. It's a much nicer way of being able to put things into perspective then for me, because I can see literally what the framework's doing internally, which is nice. That's if it's a framework. If it's a command line tool or something, then yeah, I'll install the tool, try and do a few invocations of the command. I'll make a list of the different commands that I've used and what each one does to be able to get used to it, for example. There are various different approaches, but the key point is that you want to effectively completely detach yourself from the project where ultimately you want to plug this thing into or use this tool with or whatever it might be. You need to have that separation. You need to be able to give yourself the mental headspace and the rest as well, the mental break if you like, to detach away from the real project for a couple of hours, even a full day. It might even be a full day, if it's something very complex. For example, React. If you have no idea about React and you've been told to use it in a project, then yeah, you might want to take like a full day to just learn about React, go through some tutorials, figure out how it works behind the scenes, and build that knowledge and that kind of mindset of how that particular framework works, completely independent of the project. Because then, once you've got to a stage where you are proficient with that technology, framework, tool, whatever it might be, then you only have one thing to do then, which is the bridge back into the project. And at that point, it should be fairly straightforward because you've seen how the framework, for example, works in isolation, and now you can visualize then when you come to plugging it into your own project, which classes, for example, in your project would correspond to the classes in your little self-contained project, and you can do a mapping mentally of how to plug that in. Whereas if you start with a framework complete from scratch and just try and just add a dependency to a new project and try and start coding with that framework in situ in the project itself from the outset, man, that is such an uphill battle. Give yourself the breathing space, give yourself the breathing room, detach from the real project, get an isolated project, simplest possible unit that it can be, and give yourself the freedom away from the real project so you can first of all become proficient with that new thing that it is that you want to learn, you want to employ in the project. You can become proficient with it with a clear headspace. So that's what I call freedom of experimentation. So we've covered constant self-improvement, freedom of experimentation, and the last thing is, wraps both of those things up, I guess, kind of underlines them. It's what I'd call knowledge as power. Now this is more in line with dealing with people, I'd say, and that's really that knowledge as power. But what I mean by that is that if you can talk confidently on a specific technical topic, then that means that you can go into code reviews and completely hold your own in a conversation, stand your ground, whatever expression you want to use, to be able to defend your corner and defend the code that you've written. It's not nice, it's never nice really having to defend something that you've done, because ultimately with software engineering, you have a problem, you personally have spent a lot of time developing a solution to it, and of course, by its very nature, you've attempted to come up with the very best possible and most elegant solution for that problem. It's a direct brainchild, if you like, of how to solve that problem, direct from your head, and then to have other people critique it, or contradict it, or challenge it and everything. It's never nice. Let's just face it, it's never nice. I always say that I love software engineering. I absolutely eat, breathe and sleep software engineering. I absolutely love it. I love programming, I love coding, I love playing with different technologies. It's something I really enjoy. That being said, one thing I do not like is professional IT and professional software engineering. I really don't like that at all, which would seem strange. So why you enjoy programming, why don't you like professional software engineering? The reason is because of the constraints. And the constraints might be people who are being negative, who are challenging things. It could be an organization which wants to have things done in this very specific way, in this very specific architectural style, even though you yourself know that architectural style is a load of rubbish and it won't work, and it shouldn't be done that way, it should be done a different way, because you know better as a technologist who's passionate about the craft. Or it can be having to use some off-the-shelf product which really isn't fit for purpose, but it's somehow landed its way into the project because of two executives on the seaboard who are friends on the golf course with the owner of this particular technology firm, or indeed consultancy firm, which means you've got to work with this terrible product, or you have to work with these terrible consultants, or whatever it might be. See, the act of programming is pretty much a very individual thing by its very nature. You can do pair programming and everything, and actually that's pretty enjoyable when you do it. But in general, programming, for the most part, is just you and your brain on this specific problem that's trying to be solved. And the transcription, if you like, of how you implement that solution to that problem, delivered directly from your brain through your hands, typing it on the keyboard and then seeing a finished result. That's what I love. I love that about software engineering. It's that creativity. The fact that you create literally something from nothing. That's a very powerful thing. There's very few professions, in fact, where you have the ability to be able to create something out of nothing. Almost like an immaculate conception, as it were, mentally speaking. Really good, really powerful. You as a software engineer, just a side tangent, you as a software engineer, you can create anything you want to do. You could build your own product company. You could build your own product, your own software as a service, company based off of that, your own startup, whatever it might be. You can literally take an idea in your head and just turn it into something tangible, which is used by other people in the physical world. That's an amazing thing. It's an amazing experience. It's a great profession we've chosen. And you should be inspired by that each and every day. But going back to the blockers and the getting stuck kind of side of things, when you're working with all these different constraints, different people, different personalities, and different challenges, you can feel stuck, and it's only human to feel so. It's only human to feel like that. But the key point is being able to get past it just to be able to start moving forwards again. And we do that with these 3 things. Constant self-improvement, so we're always upskilling ourselves and we're always becoming better and more skilled software engineers. Freedom of experimentation, which gives you the detachment and the mental headspace away from the project to be able to really truly understand how a framework works. And also having knowledge as power. Like I say, to go back to the knowledge as power thing, if you know how all of these things work, and you know how this specific piece of code works that you've been working on, then it doesn't matter if you have code reviews with people who are being picky about things or pedantic or challenging the way you've done things, because you understand from first principles how that code works. You have a deeper insight, if you've done it properly and diligently, you have a deeper insight into how those different components interact than the other person does. That's providing you've really gone through to the next level, if you like, and really understood exactly how those code pieces work together. If you haven't and you've done a superficial job and you've plugged in some code and it appears to work, right, then inevitably you're going to have an issue in dealing with code reviews or design discussions and that kind of stuff. But if you've examined the code you've worked on, you understand how it works with respect to the frameworks that are used and the architectural styles and all that kind of stuff. Maybe you've done this freedom of experimentation, which you've created some standalone projects to understand how those different types of technology or frameworks interact together, and you put it back in the context of the project, then yeah, you've got this knowledge as power aspect to it. Which means that even if people are being negative or people are making kind of like digs at your design or whatever, you'll be able to come straight back and say, no, actually, this is the reason why this is a good idea. I've considered these other solutions, but this is a good idea because, and then enumerate the reasons or elucidate the reasoning why your solution will work and is the best choice. Now, the magic of this is that all of these things together, constant self-improvement, freedom of experimentation, and this knowledge as power thing, all of these 3 things together has 2 really great payoffs. And those are inspiration and motivation. Because if you understand how things work, and as you encounter new ideas in technology, which give you different perspectives on how technology works, it's almost like a magpie finding little sparkly things that it can take home to its own nest. These little nuggets of inspiration, these little pieces of gold. And we need these as developers. Sometimes the job, it might seem a little mundane, particularly working in the constraints of a proper commercial project. But that's why we always have to strive to keep improving ourselves, keep experimenting with technology, keep having a play, building up that knowledge, and in doing so, we'll have fun along the way. So inspiration is so important, and that's delivered by these 3 things. And also, in turn, then you become more motivated. If you're good at something, if you're genuinely well-skilled at a particular profession, then you've got the motivation then to keep going, keep pushing through. And with those 2 things in place, inspiration and motivation, it's impossible not to start moving forwards once again. So yeah, constant self-improvement, freedom of experimentation, knowledge as power, that gives you motivation and inspiration, which should get you unstuck in whatever situation you have currently as a software developer. So that wraps it up for this episode. If you want to take your education further, you might want to check out the courses we have at the Java Easily website. So you go check out courses.javaeasily.com, or just check out the homepage, javaeasily.com, if you're completely new to Java, as we said earlier in the episode, and you can sign up for our completely free Java Jumpstart. Anyway, until next time, stay safe, have fun, and I'll see you in the next episode.